Listen loud.
So I did my study on the psychological and sociological effects of the media on body image. So in today's society, the media portrays attractive people as being thin, which causes many to feel dissatisfied, resulting in low levels of self-esteem. This thin ideal is depicted in almost every type of media, such as television, scenes, and even commercials, making it likely that it will impact our lives. Not only does the media have a detrimental effect on our body image, but it also can result in various eating disorders such as anorexia or bulimia. And it causes us to compare ourselves to others on social media. So for this presentation, I'm going to address the effects of the media on females and males' body image, the effects of the thin ideal on eating disorders in adolescents, the effects of social media, and social comparison. So in a study, researchers randomly assigned 90 participants to either the product control set or the thin idolized female set. The product control set consisted of 15 magazine advertisements of people with products without people, and the thin idolized female set consisted of like a thin attractive female. So each of the participants had to complete the visual analog scale to measure mood and body dissatisfaction, the 20 statements test to measure state self-objectification, and the physical appearance state and anxiety trait scale to measure weight appearance, anxiety. So results showed that state self-objectification was significantly higher in the thin idolized set than in the product control set. Weight-related appearance anxiety was also higher in the thin idolized female set than in the product control set. Participants who viewed thin idolized images experienced higher levels of negative mood than those who experienced product images from the product set. And there was a significant difference of thin idolized images on body dissatisfaction, which means that those who viewed the thin ideal female set were more dissatisfied with their body than those who viewed the products. So aside from the effects of the media on females' body image, researchers also studied the effects of the media on males' body image. So they were randomly assigned to either appearance advertisement group or the non-appearance advertisement group. The appearance advertisement group consisted of actors who were lean, muscular, and in their 20s. And the non-appearance advertisement condition consisted of mid to older men who were in business or casual attire. So researchers also had to complete the visual analog scales, which was also used in the previous study. So just to reiterate on that, it's used to measure mood and body dissatisfaction. They also had to complete the multidimensional body self-relations questionnaire to measure appearance satisfaction, importance of outward appearance, and feelings of being physically fit. Researchers also completed the socio-cultural attitudes towards appearing questionnaire to measure awareness and acceptance of the cultural ideals of attractiveness. And lastly, participants completed the physical appearance subscale, the bulimia cognitive distortion scale, to measure irrational beliefs and cognitive distortions relating to physical appearance. So results showed that males exposed to the appearance-related advertisements had significantly higher reports of muscle dissatisfaction than those exposed to neutral control advertisements. Males who viewed body image ideal advertisements became more depressed, while males who viewed non-appearance commercials became less depressed. Okay. And those who exposed to appearance-related advertisements reported a decrease in levels of anxiety and anger, as well as those exposed to the non-appearance advertisement. So these results indicate that exposure to media portraying the ideal male as being lean and muscular can have detrimental effects on both mood and body dissatisfaction. So researchers also studied the effects of the thin ideal on eating disorders in adolescents. In this study, researchers collected a sample of 366 participants, consisting of 123 sixth graders, 114 ninth graders, and 129 12th graders. They were also asked to take the children's attitudes test to measure both anorexia and extreme restrained eating. And results showed that for females, there was no significant interaction between grade and television exposure. However, exposure to fat character television content was a positive and significant predictor of bulimia. For the 9th and 12th grade female participants, exposure to DIN Ideal magazine content was a positive and significant predictor of bulimia as compared to the 6th graders. For males, there was a significant interaction between grade and exposure to fat character content program in predicting body dissatisfaction. And the relationship between DIN Ideal magazine exposure and anorexia was significantly higher for females than for males. So these results show that the relationship between the media and eating disorders were stronger for females than males, which implies that there is no evidence that the DIN Ideal media has any influence on eating disorder-related attitudes in men. Some reasons to explain why this may be the case is an adolescent boy knows that being lean and muscular is an additive rather than a subtractive process. And for instance, if a male lifts weights, he will gain both weight and muscle. So weight gain may be seen as a feature for adolescent boys, which shows that pictures depicting a lean male body is not to be associated with an eating disorder. A growing adolescent girl, on the other hand, may infer that thinness for a female is seen as a subtractive process in which the girl may have a fear of gaining weight, and resulting in these eating disorders in order to fit in with the DIN Ideal media. So scholars also study the effects of social media by analyzing Facebook usage on a woman's body image and mood. So they conducted it on 112 participants and were randomly assigned to either the Facebook account, the fashion magazine website, and the appearance neutral control website, and they had to browse their giving website for 10 minutes. They were asked to take a computer-based visual analog scale to measure their mood and body dissatisfaction, a state version of the self-discrepancy index to measure weight and shape-related appearance discrepancy, as well as face, hair, and skin-related appearance discrepancy, and the upward and downward appearance comparison scale, which was used to measure their tendency to compare their appearance to that of others. So results showed that there was a contrast between Facebook and control conditions, which was a significant predictor of negative mood. This means that after exposure to their assigned website, participants in the Facebook condition reported being in a more negative mood as compared to those in the control condition. There is also a contrast between the magazine and control conditions in which it significantly predicted ratings of weight and shape discrepancy. This means that participants in the online fashion magazine condition reported more weight and shape discrepancy than those assigned in the control condition. And lastly, there was no main effect of condition on face, hair, and skin-related discrepancy. Therefore, brief exposure to either Facebook or the online fashion magazine did not have an impact on how women saw their face, hair, or skin. So these findings show that exposure to Facebook in experimental standing did not have a direct effect on a young female's satisfaction with their body or their desire to change their weight and shape. However, for women who tend to make more appearance comparisons, more hours exposed to Facebook resulted in a greater desire to change their face, hair, and skin-related features. So this suggests that Facebook exposure is associated with face, hair, and skin-related concerns and not weight-related body dissatisfaction, because Facebook is comprised of more portrait images or facial features, and skin, hair are more common than the body-related comparisons. In addition, another reason for the null effects on weight-related body dissatisfaction is in the Facebook condition, there may be more images portraying a wider range of body types for comparison than in the magazine condition. So researchers interviewed both black and white girls and found that they interpreted images from the magazine as unrealistic, in which they preferred more real images. Social comparisons to images were analyzed strongly based on ethnicity. For example, white girls compared themselves negatively with the images and felt poorly about themselves in comparison to the ideal. They felt as if they had to live up to those standards portrayed by the models in the magazines by being skinny, and will reflect back on their own bodies thinking that they are overweight and need to lose weight. On the other hand, for black girls, they were not affected as badly from these images because they felt as black males were more interested in women who were not extremely thin. So the researchers suggested that one reason why people are so critical of the media is that it misinterprets reality. For instance, results show that the participants interviewed for this study stated how feminine images in magazines presented an unrealistic appearance, both in the style of clothing and in the perfection of their faces, hairs, and body, in comparison with the imperfect girls. In addition, participants commented that the models portrayed in the magazines were too perfect, especially in body shape, weight, hair, facial features, and complexion. And girls want to look like the models in magazines because they felt as if these images is what everybody wants. As stated by the interviewees in quotes, girls are influenced by magazines by having to look that way. I mean by their body and stuff because they're all really tall and skinny and everybody tries to be all really tall and skinny. So people aiming for the socially acceptable body believes that skinniness is the ideal in today's society. As quoted by one of the participants, I think our society has cultivated an unobtainable image through media and fantasy. Seems like a Western world illness we are all suffering from. So in conclusion, the media affects how both men and women look at their own bodies. Body shape and appearance are the most pivotal points of reference for a woman in describing themselves after being exposed to the thin ideal. Men also experience body dissatisfaction when exposed to the media depicting a lean and muscular man as the ideal norm. So as you can see, social comparison is common in today's society, although it may be different between ethnicities. However, the majority of girls and guys want to look like the models depicted in the media. So for future research, it is recommended that scholars look at the effects of the media on body image from a biological perspective to see if genetics may play a role, as well as toys such as Barbie dolls or action figures, since Barbie dolls are portrayed as being skinny and action figures are like muscular, as well as the historical aspects of the media on body image to see if being thin was a major concern in the past since the social media was not around. So these are my references, and I would like to thank my mentor, Dr. Cohen, for guiding me through my thesis, as well as Dr. Gare for reading it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. So our next presenter is Emma Gaffney, who's presenting an analysis of how female athletics is portrayed by the media and the impact of this in and beyond the world of sports.
Good afternoon. So I wanted to address my title really quickly before I continue with my presentation. So in my thesis, I'm dealing with female athletics as a singular entity, so as a whole. So at first glance, my title might appear to be grammatically incorrect with the use of singular is, but as I'm looking at it as a whole, I decided to use is rather than are, and Dr. Galgan, my wonderful mentor, agrees with my use of is rather than are. So, all right. So in my thesis, I'm looking at the way basically what female athletes are spoken about and how they appear in the media. So I addressed Title IX, which came into existence in 1972, and stated that no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So basically, it just gave boys and girls the rights to play sports. And this had a massive impact on females playing sports. In high schools, girls' participation increased from 294,000 participants in the 1971-1972 school year to 3.2 million participants in the 2012 and 2013 school year. In the same time period, boys' participation only increased from 3.7 million to 4.5 million. And in college sports, this also had a big impact. Female participation in the NCAA increased from 30,000 to 200,000. However, media coverage of athletes has really not reflected this growth of female athletics. And so what's the problem with this? The main problem is that female athletes are really not given the same amount of respect as male athletes are. And this is because overall female athletes receive less airtime, not just on television and newspapers, magazines, all forms of media. And commentary about female athletes is often sexist, irrelevant, about their bodies, and just plain boring. So This is bad for a few reasons. One reason is that this really can affect young girls who are starting and playing sports, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And it also enables sexism and allows like young boys and young girls and adults to really think that it's okay to talk about females in this way. So there's a study done by Michael A. Messner of USC and Cheryl Cook of Purdue that I looked at. And basically over 20 years, they did 5 studies. It was the same study, where they looked at sports on television. So they studied ESPN's Sports Center segment and also the sports news sections of 3 local network affiliates, KABC, KCBS, and KNBC in LA. And in addition to looking at how often female athletes were talked about on these news channels, they also kept track of the ticker time, which if you've ever watched news or sports news shows, this is like the scrolling ticker of headlines of the day, usually on the bottom or on the side. So the latest study of this in 2009 showed that less time now is given to female athletes and like less coverage than ever before. So in 2009, 96.3% of airtime was given to men's sports, 1.6% was given to women's sports, and 2.1% of airtime was dedicated to gender-neutral topics. By comparison, in the 2000 study and 2004 study, 2.2% of airtime was given to female athletes, and 2.1% in 2004 was given to female athletes. Additionally, the one kind of, I guess, more positive thing is that ticker time on KCBS and KNBC was 4.6% to female athletes, which is triple the airtime they're given, so it's good that they seem to be getting a lot of time on that. However, one of the more shocking aspects of the 2010 studies was that in 2004, the ticker time on ESPN given to female athletes was 8.4%, and in 2009, it went down to 2.7%. And also, on all the news shows every day, the ones they followed, 100% of the time, they led with a story about male athletes. So this is a chart showing like how much combined time, ticker time, and airtime was given to female athletes, which is the blue, male athletes, which is the red, and gender-neutral topics, which is the green. So clearly, male athletics are dominating on these TV shows of the coverage. And it's kind of hard to tell where the coverage for female athletes decreased because there's not a lot of time given to them, even initially. So, but you see that from 1989 to 1999, it rises, and it peaked in 1999, and then started going down again. So, like I said, part of the problem is a lot of the coverage of female athletes is sexist. In the 2016 Rio Olympics, this was a big problem. For example, Corey Cogdell, who's on the, I guess from your view, left-hand side, she won the bronze medal in the rifle event. However, the Chicago Tribune wrote an article about her, and the headline was, "Wife of a Bears lineman wins a bronze medal today in Rio Olympics," which basically is just saying that her husband's accomplishments are more important than winning an Olympic medal. Additionally, Katie Ledecky, who's a swimmer who had a great Olympics, broke the world record and won the 800-meter freestyle. And Michael Phelps lost and but he won the headline. So those are some examples of the sexist headlines and just the preference given to males generally in the sports world. Here are some quotes from people involved in the sports world. In 1936, Paul Galecko said, "It is a lady's business to look beautiful, and there are hardly any sports in which she seems able to do it." So that might seem like, oh yeah, that's 1936. Okay, that kind of fits the time. However, in 2006, Bill Simmons said, "Well, the vast majority of WNBA players lack crossover sex appeal. The baggy uniforms don't help." And in 2015, Andy Minot said, "Women's sports in general are not worth watching." So coverage that's irrelevant. So a lot of the coverage of female athletes is just doesn't even talk about the sports, but yet this counts in the real minuscule amount of time they're given coverage. So lifestyle stories about athletes, or things like athletes becoming a mom or getting married or who they're dating, more like what you'd be reading in People magazine about celebrities. But those count as sports coverage of these athletes. Like this headline, 15 female athletes who are surprisingly still single. Like, to me, I don't really care about that. I'd rather read about their athletic accomplishments. Body image. So this kind of ties into Danielle's presentation, but there's a lot of the coverage is also about female athletes' body types. Reporters commenting if they're too fat, too skinny, and articles about the clothing choices they wear, like this headline, "The most outrageous women's outfits in US Open history." Which just, again, why are we spending time covering that aspect? I want to know about who's doing well in the US Open. I don't really care if they showed up in a crazy colored skirt, you know? And then also, like, this article appeared in an Australian newspaper about Australian swimmer Liesl Jones. So basically they were just commenting on the upcoming 2012 Olympics, and because she had gained a little bit of weight, they were commenting, is she going to be able to still swim? When clearly all these pictures are of her still training, despite her weight gain. So I also looked at the language used by the media. So I found this study done by Cambridge in England, and it was the Cambridge English Corpus, which is a multi-billion word collection of English language. It contains both written and spoken English, so they drew a lot of, they drew their data from different things like magazines, newspapers, and then for spoken word they also did radio broadcasts, speeches, and more. They spent a lot of time doing this, and they divided into different sections to study different types of different topics. And so they had a section just about sports, and they found that men are talked about 3 times more than women in sports in general. The word like man or male or words used to describe men appear more. Also, the words most associated with male athletes include fastest, strong, big, real, and great. Where female athletes, the words most associated with them are aged, older, pregnant, and married or unmarried. Again, this is just about, most of those articles about females are about our lifestyle articles, not about their athletic accomplishments. So Serena Williams was someone I ended up spending a lot of time on because her and her sister Venus are subject to so many vicious attacks about their race and their body figures because they're both very, especially Serena, very strong women. They're often called men or compared to men. They're accused of taking performance-enhancing drugs, and they're described as animalistic. So, for example, in the 2002 US Open, Serena Williams was attacked for wearing a black catsuit to compete in. So a quote on that was, "On some women, the catsuit might look good. Unfortunately, some women aren't wearing it." Again, it just seems like an unnecessary attack, and for someone as talented as Serena Williams, why are we spending time trying to bring her down rather than talk about her accomplishments? Also, Serena gets a lot of comments, and even Venus as well, saying that she should compete in the male circuit. However, when one male athlete, John McEnroe, was asked about that, he stated if she played in the men's circuit, she'd be like 700 in the world. So again, they're just diminishing her accomplishments. And she addressed this in an open letter to her daughter after she gave birth, stating, "I've been called a man because I appeared outwardly strong. It has been said that I used drugs. No, I have always had far too much integrity to behave dishonestly in order to gain an advantage. It has been said that I don't belong in women's sports, that I belong in men's because I look stronger than many other women do. No, I just work hard and was born with this body and am proud of it." So that also ties in. I started studying a lot about how recently female athletes are starting to speak out about the treatment they receive by the media and are no longer being complacent with being talked about this way. And I think it was really good that she spoke out about it, because the way she's talked about can also really affect how young female athletes playing her sport or other sports feel about themselves. So USA Soccer, they've really become a leader, the women's team, in gender equality, or demanding gender equality in sports. In the 2015 Women's World Cup, they won, and 23 million people actually tuned into their game, and it became the most watched soccer game in U.S. history. Like, the men's games weren't even close. And the numbers of people watching this game are comparable to how many people watch Game 7 of the World Series. So as far as arguments that people don't want to watch women's sports, that is one great example of people actually wanting to watch women's sports. Additionally, so more about how they kind of became this leader in gender and fighting for gender equality in sports. In March 2016, 5 players filed a wage discrimination complaint, basically just saying that they wanted equal payment and equal treatment with the men, especially considering that they have been far more successful than men for a really long time. They're constantly making it they're winning the World Cup or getting to the final rounds of the World Cup, where the men's typically lose in the first round. So their outspokenness has started to really inspire other female teams to start demanding their own equality, and it's really having a major impact. Norway recently is one of the first countries that has stated they're going to be paying their men's and women's soccer team equally. So one team they really inspired was the USA women's hockey team, which won the Olympics this year. And so they were inspired by USA Soccer demanding equality, and they decided that because they were getting nowhere asking for the same treatment as the men's team, that they were going to boycott the 2017 World Championships. And again, like women's soccer, they're more successful than the men's program. I believe that since 1999, they have not placed lower than second in a world championship, including Olympics or just the world champs. They weren't being paid a living wage. Most of them had 2 or 3 jobs trying to support themselves. And there was no marketing done. They didn't even have their own social media page. So no one was aware that they were playing games or who they were. And also they found out that after the previous Olympics, USA Hockey as a program kept them from going on to TV appearances to talk about themselves. So they were also just preventing them from promoting the program. So another thing I looked at was the USA Gymnastics scandal, which I'm sure everyone has heard of and is aware of. And I really I didn't want to spend too much time talking about what happened. We all know what happened, but what I was looking at is the way it was portrayed by the media, and also how it tied in with the MeToo movement, and how the use of social media really was a big player in this. So the USA Gymnastics doctor, Larry Nassar, he sexually abused a lot of his patients, and it was the biggest sports sex scandal in history, with over 265 victims. So this story was originally broke by the Indianapolis Star, and at that time there were 2 victims that gave them the information to break this story. One wished to remain anonymous, the other used her name. So because of these 2 brave women saying that this happened to them, other victims decided to speak out, which in the end really helped the case against Nassar, and the victim impact statements were a big part of his trial. But it also tied into the MeToo movement, which was emerging in Hollywood at the same time. So a lot of the current and past Olympians were coming out and saying, "Me too, this happened to me." So this really impacted the trial and everything, and how the public felt about it, because initially there was a huge wave of public support for Nassar, and the victims were attacked for speaking out and speaking up, which unfortunately happens a lot with cases like this. So it was also discovered that USA Gymnastics had been covering up this culture of abuse, because they found out in 2015, but this story didn't break until 2016. So they've been trying to cover this up. So there's been a lot of talk, and a lot of the athletes saying how they really enabled this culture of abuse, because not only was the sex abuse going on, but there was also verbal and psychological abuse coming from coaches. So Ali Razman was one really big player in this whole USA Gymnastics and MeToo movement. She spoke out a lot about what happened to her on television shows and using her platform and influence on social media to talk about what happened and also speak out a lot about victim shaming, which was happening to the girls. So they were being told, like for one of her tweets pictured here, she had been asked if they should stop wearing leotards because people were saying maybe their costumes were the problem. And she spoke and said, no, leotards are not the problem. And that was victim blaming. Like, you can't say that because what we are wearing, this is our fault. So she was because a lot of people were telling them it was their fault. And she also was a big one kind of putting this pressure on USA Gymnastics to stop victim shaming and also to kind of take responsibility for what had happened because they were really trying to kind of cover it up and not accept responsibility initially. So kind of to wrap up my presentation, so the kind of some of the effects that all this negative media and lack of media about female athletes has is that, one, it's really hard for young girls to find role models in their sports. If you're playing basketball, tennis, soccer, swimming, whatever, it's not easy for you to look and find these women who are doing these tremendous things as athletes. For a boy playing basketball, it's really easy to look and find Steph Curry. He's everywhere, and he's a great player, and so it's easy for them to have Steph Curry as their aspiration, as their role model. But when you're not able to see these female athletes and see your potential role models, you don't have role models for your sport. Or maybe your role models are more people who are part of your family, which is a great thing as well, but I think it's important to be able to have role models in your field. Additionally, the way that female athletes are talked about really has detrimental effects on young athletes and just young girls in general. If a young girl who's starting to play tennis hears the negative way Serena Williams is talked about, it can really discourage her from playing tennis because she doesn't want to have people talking about her this way, and it also causes her, maybe if they're talking about Serena Williams' body, to look at her own body and find flaws that maybe aren't there, but she can perceive are there. And a lot of girls actually quit sports at a really young age or when they start to get into their teenage years because they feel uncomfortable in their uniforms or in what they have to wear, which I think has a lot to do with how this media coverage is. And additionally, it enables sexism. And when reporters are talking the way they are about female athletes, not only does that make it seem to young children or even adults that it's okay to talk about female athletes this way, but it also just says it's okay to talk about females this way, which isn't okay. And that's why I think this really needs to change, and female athletes need to be promoted more and seen more, and in a positive way, not in a negative way. So thank you for listening. And that was actually something, speaking of hockey, when I was studying the USA women's hockey team, that I found. One of them, I think Hillary Knight, said that most people don't even know that women's hockey is a thing, like that there are games being played. And so people don't even know that this is an option for them to play sports. And I think a lot of that is because the promotion is based heavily on the men and not the women. But I do think that it's important to have, more endorsements with female athletes and sponsorship with female athletes, because just seeing them really increases the awareness of it. One of my theories is and I didn't really get to explore it, is that if female athletic games were promoted more and shown more, that there would be more opportunity for them to be big events like the Super Bowl. And even in terms of getting people to games, when they were interviewing the USA hockey players, a lot of them went to Wisconsin, and they were saying that I think that stadium could fill 15,000 or something, and they were able to fill that at their college level games. So I think that kind of ties into, they promoted them so heavily at Wisconsin that they were able to get that attendance up. So I think that the same could be applied to television, because I'm sure there was a lot spent in advertising on the USA Women's World Cup. That was really one of the most shocking things I found, that the coverage declined. And I didn't really look into too much and didn't see the reasons behind that, but I do know that a couple other things happened that made the perception that it wasn't declining, but it was about the same. And there are two things. One was that the sexist commentary has gone down, actually. So there's a decline in, coverage being sexist. but also the coverage has become more boring, is what they studied at USC, and they discovered that, female athletes aren't being talked about the same way male athletes are, and it's not as entertaining to watch. And so I think maybe once they started talking about female athletics and making it seem boring, that they probably they probably started declining it because the numbers went down. So that might have something to do with it. I think what we can do to improve the situation is, one, to start, if these events aren't being promoted, take it upon yourselves to find out where they're being promoted. I mean, we have, I think, 2 WNBA teams in New York. Buy tickets, support things like the WNBA, support these women's teams, and if the attendance goes up and if you're watching the media and reading the media about them, then, and they see there's an interest, then I think they'll be able to start increasing it, because unfortunately television and media is a lot about money and making money, and they don't really seem to think that the money's there for women's sports, but I think it can be there if we show there's an interest, and it's harder to find, but if you look for it and find it, I think that you can really make a difference and help. And also just following these athletes on social media, on Twitter, Instagram, all of this, and supporting them as well, then that'll be able to help the problem. Because women's tennis is the outlier kind of for this. I think I read that people seem to prefer women's tennis even over men's tennis. So it's probably because they get a lot of support. So if we're supporting these teams and they see that we like USA women's soccer better than we like USA men's soccer because the women are winning, then then they'll probably start promoting that more because they'll see that there's an interest there. Yeah, I agree that that's equally important to see the women producing this media out there. I didn't really look too much into television specifically, but I did read a statistic in an article that was talking about why coverage is so low. And 90%, I think, of sports editors in the US are white men. So one, that's also a factor in diversity being an issue as well. So not only is it harder for female athletes to get shown on TV, but it's also harder for female athletes of color to be shown on TV. So it was like 90% are white men. So that's part of the problem. But there has been an increase in that. So once we start increasing and having more women involved in this field, they'll know, I think they'll start to want to write about it, and they'll be able to provide different perspectives and provide more media for this.
All right, and our next presenter is Stefan Ivanovic with The Fake American Dream.
Hi everyone, my name is Stefan Ivanovic, and I'm an immigrant. And my thesis is The Fake American Dream. This is my thesis statement, which I want to start off so you have a clearer idea of what I'll be talking about today. Over the course of history, through present day, American people have been influenced by government opinions, decisions, and statements, which has resulted in negative perception of the intentions and experiences of immigrants coming to the United States of America. First off, I wanted to start with immigration history. So we knew that from the earliest days, America has been a nation of immigrants, starting with the original bridge between Asia and North America, and came here. After them, it was in the 1500s where the Europeans started coming in their colonies, and then there was also some of the first American settlers that came in 1620s because they were prosecuted from doing their fate in their countries, so they came to America, and they're known as pilgrims. Many immigrants also came to America for economic opportunities. They saw this new shiny land, they heard stories, and they were ready to take on a new journey and come. This journey was always hard. This journey was always long. For example, a European immigrant at these times had to cross the sea for 3 months, get seasick, be starved, be cold, and would not always make it across the ocean. So these travels were literally life of death. Are you gonna have this new life? Are you gonna start a new opportunity and your new dream? Or you might die trying. But a lot of people did it. Starting with the first Europeans in the colonial era, Then after that, there was another major wave in the 1950s to 1965. A lot of the Western European countries and Southern Europe came with the British colonies, with the French colonies, and started building that dream and believing that this new country will work for them and that the new life will be successful in America. After that, they also in the 18th century, the 19th century, there was a lot of Germans that came. Around 5 million Germans came. And then in European immigration of 1880 to 1920, over 30 million immigrants came in those 40 years. That was one of the biggest waves with, in 1903, over 3.7 million immigrants came just that year. So the word spread that this American dream is alive and it works and you can have a new life and you can have a future that you can't have in your home country for whatever reason it is. In the beginning, there were no rules. If you can buy a ticket, if you can get on the boat, if you can somehow get here, that's it. You're here, you're a citizen of this new land, and you make your own destiny. After a while, Congress started with the Constitution was just saying that the states would have to control their immigration. So there wasn't much control. Many of the states just let people flow in. They needed labor force. They needed a lot of immigrants to work all the jobs. The first time that changed was when the federal government, the immigration changed where they needed some kind of stop and they wanted to take over from the states, was in 1882 with the Chinese Exclusion Act. They realized that they cannot allow any more Chinese laborers because they were willing to work, especially in California where most of them came, for way less money than any other person in California. So the Californians were getting very mad and they decided to just exclude them from immigration. After that, Ellis Island started. I'm sure everyone knows of Ellis Island. I really hope you've been there. And Ellis Island made immigration as a first official process where people came in, were inspected, needed to meet some standards in order to be admitted to the country and live this dream. So that's where the change started, which still wasn't that bad since the American dream was still there, just with a few bureaucratic hiccups. But the wars were also there, and the wars came with politics, or both ways. So the first thing I found during my research was that each war immediately turned everything against the immigrants. Americans were just always hurt and were thinking that the immigrants in some way were responsible for something, either that the Americans are hungry or the war or some kind of whatever problem there was always a part of it that was blamed at the immigrants in each one of these wars. And during these wars, immigration plummeted, especially during World War I and World War II, where immigration was very much at the bottom. But on the other hand, all the immigrants that were here were very much enlisting in the army and fighting for this country. And actually in the Civil War, it is one of the 4 soldiers of the Union was an immigrant, and each and 2 out of the 4 soldiers were were the second generation immigrants. So the Time magazine said that they think the Civil War was actually won by immigrants. History has pretty much ignored this, has not been mentioned much, and it has been left in the past. When it comes to modern day age, I wanted very much to reflect on 9/11, and I think this one touched all of us now. everything before was history that we only read about in the books and don't really are influenced in our lives. But 9/11 changed everyone's life, changed every American's life, changed life of everyone who's tried to come to America. And I think that was when the American dream kind of started to crack in the eyes of immigrants. The consequences of the 9/11 were, of course, the biggest one, the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then everything that changed when it comes to attitude toward immigrants, the situation in America when it comes to how people treated immigrants, what the opinions were. People were getting blamed for things they've never even didn't even know about. And then the other side of things, of where all the immigrants that were coming to America, how hard and different has this event made their lives and their American dream. When it comes to people who are already here, the biggest issue was with the Muslim population, where people were getting blamed, beaten up, thrown out of places, and pointed at for just being Muslim, if that was recognized on the street or in a bar, because the government did nothing. And that, I very much want to reflect on that the government did not properly deal with this event. This changed American lives, but it also changed lives of everyone around the world. They, in a way, and I've proven, I think, this with my research into thesis, is they've used an event of this kind that is so sad and horrible to kind of use it in the US government's favor of changing laws and immigration that makes it everything they ever wanted. Homeland Security was created, TSA was created, and what we saw is that the American people literally gave up their, in a way, some of it, their freedom and their voice, their privacy, because they just wanted to be safe. They wanted to feel safe after this event. They wanted to think that nothing like this could ever happen again, and they were willing to do anything. So they did. They let the government create laws, change policies, everything that the government wanted, pretty much they've got it. One interesting fact is, for example, TSA, that was created right after 9/11 through Homeland Security, who is here to protect the American citizens and protect us from different immigrants entering this country. New York Times did a experiment in 2014 where they sent 10 of their reporters with 10 different bombs, smaller, bigger ones, handmade. Some of them were different kinds of explosives. 9 out of the 10 devices passed TSA, and they were homemade. So that just proves how much of that agency is not. But when you go through TSA, they will make you throw away your water bottle because you can't take that to America. That's one of the examples. When it comes to people who do not live in America at this point, a lot of things changed. For us Europeans, things got harder. The American dreams got pushed farther away. Laws changed. It was not so easy to, again, come to this country. Anything when it comes to jobs, there was no hiring of foreigners. Even students were very much impacted by the procedures and everything they had to do in order to get here and try to build their life in a new country of these procedures. So every single aspect of an immigrant's life was affected by this event, even though it really didn't have to, in order to continue to have a safe America without affecting immigrants in such a way that it changes their life. My final chapter is about Donald Trump, the current administration, and what happens in the future. Trump administration from the beginning, from when the campaign started with the very strong narrative when it comes to immigration, how it's failing, how it needs to be changed, and painted this new image that was started a spark at 9/11 and was lingering during the past 15 years, but now is come to light where he very much publicly said that pretty much all immigrants are criminals, that are bad people, that steal American jobs. And many other examples of why people like me and any other were put in the same bag as someone who is a real criminal. And that very much, I think, now has changed everything when it comes to immigrants' life and the American dream. We used to be not put in, the categories were always separate until now, and then when he voiced it so strong, all the people who voted for him kind of stood behind that and acknowledged that and wanted to bring it forward. The law changes he's proposing are very much, I would say, not fair towards regular immigrants like myself who came to this country very illegal through 7,000 papers I had to file and a lot of money that was given in order to be here, try my best, and then stay in this country. That has pretty much changed in so many ways now that it is coming to a point where it's almost impossible to stay in this country. You could still come to study, but staying in this country at this point is at the slightest possible percentage ever, I would say, since the first immigrants. And that has also turned the American people with this new stance of that we are stealing their jobs. And I found over 20 studies that confirm that that is at no point true. There's so many jobs in this country that cannot be supported without immigrants. All the fields of strawberries and the IT department and so many different departments of our life are all supported by so many immigrants on a seasonal level, on a full-time living here level, where if they cut them off, there won't be those people who contribute so much to the economy and pay their taxes and do everything else that just to live that little part of the American dream. When it comes to the future outcome, I very much hope that this kind of current state of mind on immigration and everything that's going on goes away with the current administration. For now, I think it will get a little worse with all the laws that are coming and everything that is trying to be changed and the stance America is showing towards immigrants. And I think the rest of the world has definitely been paying attention. And now, I've talked to a lot of people, a lot of my friends who are from different countries that are also here from around the world. They've all said that it's kind of given them this bad feeling about America of like, do I want to be here anymore now that they don't really want me here? So people have turned away from the American dream and are now looking at it as, maybe I should go home. Maybe I can find it somewhere else in another country and live my dream. So I really hope that it does change and that we will go back to knowing what immigrants and what their American dream can contribute to the economy, to the American people, and to this country as a whole.
All right, our next presenter is Valerie Kaufmann with Chaos, Complicity, Art in Nazi Germany.
So this period, obviously in history, has been well covered, and I feel like I've only really scratched the surface when it comes to it. That being said, I also felt like I had way too much to put into a 10-minute presentation, but I will do my best. Like most research projects, I went into this thinking I was going to come out with a completely different conclusion than I did. So initially, I went into this with the view of this Nazi cultural machine controlling art as it controlled life in Nazi Germany, both as a product and a sort of way of perpetuating Nazi fear and Nazi principles. While I still think that's true, I think that the rhetoric oftentimes overshadowed the actions. Rhetoric like, as Hitler said, those prehistoric, this is in reference to modern artists, those prehistoric Stone Age culture barbarians and art stutterers can return to the caves of their ancestors and therein apply their primitive international scratchings. This is about some of the harshest rhetoric I could imagine, but drawing upon this framework that we examine the Nazi period through a functionalist and intentionalist framework, which I will delve into later, we kind of see that the Nazi machine was not always successful in perpetuating the harsh rhetoric that they liked to talk about. And I will examine the most disturbing idea of all, which is that when it did find success, the Nazi machine was also often aided by the complicity of the artists, critics, and scholars of the time. So I wanted to start with this guy. His name is Joseph Goebbels. As I'm sure you can see, he was the Minister of Propaganda in Nazi Germany, and he's a very important guy. So he controlled all this. He ended up expanding his power to control the Reich Chamber of Visual Arts, which included all of these aspects. I think it's interesting to note that propaganda and fine arts were under the same umbrella within Nazi Germany. It definitely had an effect. The final one I also want you to note, Department of Art Promotion, Artist Associations, and Craft Associations. Artists of the time were forced to sign up for these associations. That being said, they also experienced great profit from the associations, and being a part of them, they got a lot of state commissions, so there was a profit incentive. It wasn't all forced, which is kind of a theme that I want to draw upon throughout the presentation. So one tactic that the Nazis used that was very consistent with what the idea I had of it going in was the tactic of censorship. This took many forms. One is the Professional Civil Service Restoration Act, which was not just for arts, it was just for any state jobs. If you were non-Aryan, you could be fired. There was an outlawing of art criticism as per a Goebbels directive, and he said that you could say things about art, you could just only describe it. You couldn't say anything nice or bad about it, which is basically cutting off the legs of any art criticism. And then there was also the most famous example, I would say, which was the Ziegler Commission, where the Nazis went in and in the period of 6 months seized 5,000 paintings and 12,000 pieces of artwork from national galleries. So let's talk about what degenerate art is, just to see what they were seizing. So this is a very broad directive issued by Goebbels saying that degenerate art was works that insult public feeling or describe or confuse natural form or simply reveal an absence of adequate manual and artistic skill. Now this is a very, very broad statement, and it can be applied to anything or nothing, really. It's up to the bureaucrats' whims. And I think that's really important to note is the vagueness of these statements made by the Nazis. They're very strong, but they're very vague. So here are two examples of what would be considered degenerate art. This is Max Beckmann's Descent from the Cross and Ernst Ludwig Kirchner's Street, Brooklyn, both at MoMA. So degenerate art stems from the word I don't know. I don't speak German. I apologize. But this word means when an animal has deviated so much from its species that it is no longer a part of the species. So this is sort of the concept that Nazis use for Jewish people and for art, which makes sense because it was sort of an overarching ideology. Modern art uses primitive elements. It was considered amoral in a lot of senses because it elevated non-beautiful objects to the status of art, which Hitler hated. It was deemed blasphemous and insane even before the Nazi regime came into power in a lot of cases. One example is image making by the mentally ill by this author Hans Pronghorn, and he would take pieces of art by modern artists and put it next to people in an insane asylum's art for the purpose of denigration. So what was done once it was deemed degenerate? It was burnt, as a lot of books were. This is a book burning that I took the picture of, but there were similar things done to art. It was sold abroad, again, bringing up that monetary incentive that was actually at the crux of a lot of these issues. And 650 examples were kept for the degenerate art exhibit. The degenerate art exhibit, which is what kind of spurred this inquiry, opened in Munich on July 19th, 1937, and was open for 4 months. It traveled then around Germany and Austria. It got a crowd of 2 million plus in Munich, and then a little over 1 million on tour as well. So it was wildly popular. In contrast, to the approved German art exhibit, which I'll talk about in a sec. So here are some examples of the exhibit. As you can see, the artworks are really crowded onto the space. The lighting is awful. There are words written next to it, which I can't read German, which was the bane of my existence during this research project. But I can't read German, but it's derogatory comments. And also you can't see it, but there are wall plaques saying how much was spent on the art, which, you know, to anyone, if you see how much MoMA is spending on art as well, does seem crazy, but, you know, it's the arts. This is in contrast to approved art. Again, there were 8 annual exhibits of this. Here you see Hitler and some of his deputies walking through. Very nice space with a lot of room and lighting for the art. So that was in contrast. What was approved art? In my paper, I argue that there wasn't really Nazi art. It was just art that was then kind of deemed Nazi after the fact in intention versus actual elements of the art. But in general, people see Nazi art as Völkisch art, which is white supremacy based. It focuses on nature, family life. The Aryan German man, of course, very strong and heroic, and the Aryan German woman, very docile and always a mother, and then portraits of Hitler. So in general, I think the strongest underlying principle of all this is that the eradication of the unhealthy was important to caring for the healthy in Nazi Germany. They didn't really know what they wanted, they just knew what they didn't want, and were much better at shaming what they didn't want versus what they actually wanted. So another tactic that they used in addition to fear was random targeting. An example of this is the artist Ernst Barlach. Barlach actually referred to himself as an Aryan well before the Nazis came into power. He also spoke of a victorious German spirit, and he fought in a war for Germany, World War I. But this was not enough to save Barlach. Even though he was not entirely expressionist, his works were actually quite figurative. He was labeled a Jew and not allowed any more commissions, and died by himself, unfortunately. The counter to this is the example of Arno Breker. He's sort of the guy who got in with the Nazis and was able to profit from it. So artists kind of had one of two fates in Nazi Germany. It was comply or experience the fate of Barlach. With Breker, what he did, he actually was more of an unlikely candidate for the Nazis to like. He studied in France, gross, and then he had a lot of modernist friends, gross. So these were not good things in the Nazi eyes, but because he ingratiated himself to them and adhered to this sort of style that Hitler liked, he was allowed many commissions and became very rich. Some artists also went into exile to escape this fate. I don't want to neglect them. You have artists like Kandinsky, Chagall, Ernst and Gross that flee and are either vocal critics or kind of go into hiding. It depends on their personal style. So ultimately, I think it's a sort of combination of belligerence and appeasement that the Nazis tend to do with this. In some senses, they are themselves inconsistent. So for example, the Nazi foreign minister actually commissions a modern artist for a portrait of his children, and Max Beckmann, whose work was just shown before in the examples of degenerate art, actually was friends with a personal art dealer of Hitler's who would often purchase his work. So there were just all these inconsistencies that kind of mess with this idea I was having of this, iron-fisted cultural machine. That's where this intentionalist versus functionalist framework kind of comes into play. And I address this in the latter part of my paper. Intentionalist framework is what I went in with, right? It's this idea that Hitler and his immediate deputies had all the control. They knew what they wanted from the beginning, and they just went for it, and they got it, right? That was the idea. And it was popular during the immediate aftermath of World War II, when everyone was wondering how this could happen. And then also during the Cold War, when we were vilifying the communists, because we like to call them totalitarian. So if the Nazis were this genius totalitarian machine, it was a lot easier to vilify the communists. But it also takes responsibility away from the masses, right? It focuses it just on Hitler and his deputies. The functionalist framework, I think, is a lot more compelling because this one became popular post-Cold War. It emphasizes the revolutionary and chaotic elements within the bureaucracy, including the infighting. And it kind of casts a wider net. One criticism of this framework is that it doesn't put enough emphasis on Hitler and his bureaucracy. I think that's false. I think it puts very strong emphasis on them, and it makes us question ourselves and everyday citizens in their complicity with such atrocious acts. On that note, I kind of want to leave with this quote, which is, "Totalitarianism is a dangerous dimension in democracy. The border between democracy and totalitarianism is not fixed." I think that it really does us all, in any chaotic political time, a great service to reflect on the actions we take every day and make sure that we mind this border. Yeah, that's an interesting question. What I found in my research tended to be a lot of historians right after the war started to view this period in isolation as a kitschy moment in German history. It's like, wow, there's this great German culture, and then in came Hitler, ruined it, But a lot of post-war art was in reaction to that. So they started really collecting modernist works again, trying to sort of get back to the point where actually artists like the second one I mentioned, Brecker, ended up doing modernist works after the war and getting commissions for those, even though during the war he was doing all this kitsch for the Nazis. So it's a very interesting sort of period, definitely, because I do think it became isolated from the rest of German history, but just as a virtue of, people trying to cut themselves off from it afterwards.
Did you look at any artwork being done between World War I and World War II in Germany?
I did a little bit. It was mostly in reference to how these sort of claims of blasphemy and, insanity and things were being leveled at artists beforehand. I think a lot of modern scholarship on the Nazis was that it wasn't like it was a build-up to the final solution. There was a lot of in-between time where things were heating up, and I think that's the same with art, where you see that sort of heat up there. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of that out there where people will hide works, they'll, try to send them away. I didn't focus on it quite so much just because I do think those stories are, sort of trumpeted, and it's like the same as with Paris. Every Parisian was a resistor in their own eyes. So I kind of, right, exactly, right. So I was trying to focus a little less on these like big heroic stories. I actually didn't focus, as you know, because she's my reader, I didn't focus as much on individuals. I did a few individuals to sort of highlight larger points, but I was trying to kind of stay away, because just as we do by focusing on Hitler, I think that focusing too much on an individual can kind of miss the larger story.
So our next presenter is Kara Palmer with How Social Media Impacts the Well-Being of College-Aged Men.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for sticking around for my presentation. I know we're getting kind of close to the end. So my name's Kara, and I will be presenting my thesis on how social media impacts the well-being of college-aged men, and it's mentored by Dr. Cohen, and my reader is Dr. Klein. So I think I'd like to start out with why this topic. I think this is something that should be addressed before I go into my research. So to understand my topic, I think it'd be really helpful if you understood a little bit about me and a little bit about the research that is already presented about social media. So I am a comms major here at St. Francis. I have a specialized education in digital marketing, so I take marketing classes as well as digital media classes. I'm the social media intern at DoSomething.org, so I work with social media every day and how it relates to community building and demographic. So I'm really interested in relationship science and sociology. I actually took an honors psych class with Dr. Cohen, little shout out to her, all about relationship science, and it got me really interested in the topic. I don't believe in enforcing gender roles or dangerous stereotypes, and I do have a feeling that social media usage can be linked to psychological well-being, just based off of my education in social media and just being a social media user as well. So I knew that I wanted to do my paper on social media, but there are so many subtopics within social media that I wasn't sure where to begin. So I began my research stage, and these are some topics that I couldn't stop finding research on, and I titled it that because I truly could not stop finding research on these things. So psych researchers, these topics are covered, but truly a huge thing that I couldn't stop finding research on is how social media is connected to girls' body dissatisfaction, and especially just the overall mental health of girls. Oftentimes young girls, but you name it, middle school girls, college-age girls, women. It just goes on and on just about body dissatisfaction and how it is connected to social media, which is 100% true, but it just seems like there's a lot missing from that. So another topic is how social media impacts education, how it affects relationship satisfaction, how homosexual men use social media for dating, and how excessive social media use leads to depression and anxiety. So these are all topics that are very much covered for now. But wait, what demographic is surprisingly missing from most of this research, and that is college-aged heterosexual cisgendered men. So this demographic is rarely underrepresented, as we all know, but for some reason there's so much research on women and how women are being impacted, how our mental health is impacted, but for whatever reason we don't give this type of attention to men, especially college-aged men and heterosexual men. So yeah, I began thinking about well-being of college-aged men, but there is so much to unpack there, what does well-being mean, especially when you're in a specific demographic. So I kind of got 6 points out of what well-being means to me in my research, and that is social media use, gender roles and masculinity, sexuality and relationships, body image, college culture, and mental health. So I'm going to go through each of these subtopics and kind of tell you the main points of my research. I was able to kind of Frankenstein together these really interesting topics and research articles on social media use and how this demo is using social media, and also research on their well-being. So through both of those things, I was able to really prove my hypothesis here. So first I want to start with how is this demographic using social media to begin with? Well, clearly the numbers are here if you want to see. This demographic is on social media. They do have a presence, and a lot of times their presence is even more known than female presence. I think I want to go through each of these and just kind of unpack the culture of each of them in case you're unfamiliar. So Twitter is kind of like a mini blog, everyone says. So it used to be 140 characters, now it's 280 characters. Each tweet is kind of a thought, and a lot of times people share intimate opinions or just day-to-day thoughts on Twitter throughout the day as kind of a personal blog. It's kind of, once it's up, it kind of gets lost in the newsfeed easily. So yeah, a lot of people share their thoughts on Twitter. Instagram is notoriously a very vain platform. It's picture-based. There's a whole culture behind it that revolves around FOMO, fear of missing out. It revolves around comparison and seeing only what people want you to see, really, through pictures. And then there's Facebook, which is notoriously becoming a not very young website. So Facebook right now is being used by college students to really keep in touch with family. Once you're in college, that's kind of your time to be like, hey, look at the things I'm doing and keep up with people who live far away from you. And Snapchat. Snapchat's 45% of Snapchat users are in my demo. So it's crazy. It's a very well-used app throughout college, and it's oftentimes used to show things that you wouldn't normally show on, say, Instagram or Facebook. It's 10-second images or videos that you can send to either everyone in your contact list or just one contact, and then it disappears. So here's some things that I found on gender role and masculinity with college-aged men. One thing I found is that there's a huge double standard for female and male students during transitional times. So I like to use the example for when I was going away for college. Everyone asked me, aren't you scared? Aren't you going to miss your family? Aren't you going to miss home? There's going to be a lot of changes. When my male cousin went away for college, it was, aren't you so glad you're going to be independent? It's going to be so great. People were giving him advice. So it's kind of this double standard, but this doesn't mean that men have it better with this double standard. In fact, it doesn't give men room to accept transitional space and to really process the transition, because most of the time they're just being told it's all great. So college-age men also feel gender role conflict in success and competition. And this is where I like to link it back to things like Instagram, where all you're seeing is what people want you to see through pictures. So college-aged men, they're feeling the most gender role conflict when they're looking at other men. And so when they see another man who is more muscular or fitting more societal ideals, that's when they're going to feel the most gender role conflict. It's not when they see women being super feminine or etc. Also, there's this huge stigma around seeking mental health resources and sharing emotional reactions, which I kind of just touched on when I said that there is a double standard. We don't allow men the same space as we allow women when it comes to processing their emotions. So things like Twitter, like I mentioned before, are often used to share these intimate feelings and opinions, and men are just not as willing to share on Twitter. It's been found through some of the studies I was looking at with Twitter usage. So yeah, it just proves that there's some stigma around it. These are the main points I found on sexuality and relationships. So social media allows for coercive and or unsolicited sexual content to be shared instantly and without much consequences. I mentioned an app before called Snapchat. That was actually what one of the articles that I referenced a lot in my research was about, how Snapchat kind of allows for this very excessively sexual content to be shared without proof that it was shared. So, for example, a lot of college-age students were using Snapchat to share like nude photos of themselves very directly, and there's no real way to prove it. So that's just one way that social media is being used in college that reflects sexuality and mental health around that. So there's also a general acceptance of sexual violence within like pack mentality with men. So if you're a college-age male and most of your friends are talking about women in a certain way and sexual violence in a certain way, men are less inclined to step up and say something than women usually are. So if, a woman was in the same position with female friends, and someone was saying something that they disagreed with, women are more, feel more empowered to correct friendships, where men are just not, because of pack mentality. And also, college-age men prefer casual sex over romantic relationships, which contributes a lot to just overall sexuality and college culture. So body image and self-esteem, this is something that Danielle covered a lot of. But college-age men are generally dissatisfied with their bodies when comparing theirs to other men's bodies, particularly muscular men. So I touched upon this again with Instagram. They're facing the most insecurity when they're scrolling through their feeds and they're seeing other men. Also, peer influence and media were found to be the biggest factors in body dissatisfaction. So it's not just what they're seeing on social media, but it's how they're comparing themselves to their peers. So it's not just idolizing, say, a football player, who you see on Instagram like 3 times a week. They have these unreal bodies. You feel gender role conflict with that, but it's also peers that they're also comparing themselves to, which is not always talked about. It's a lot of times, like, even when we talk about women, we talk about how girls look at supermodels and they feel not well about their bodies. But with men, it's not just athletes or people you idolize, it's your peers. And college-age men are willing to turn to performance-enhancing drugs or disordered eating to obtain muscle definition. There was one study that tracked the eye movement of men when they looked at pictures of 3 different men. So there was one normal body, one muscular body, and one hypermuscular body. And it was shown that, like, the first thing men looked at were the shoulders, the chest, and the legs. And they were really looking for muscle definition there, and they were looking for how it compared to themselves. And lastly, college culture. I think this is like the bulk of what my research is really about. Again, I said that this is such a transitional time for everyone, regardless of gender, and it needs to be given more research. So almost 60% of college students aged 18 to 22 drank alcohol in the past month, and almost 2 out of 3 of them engaged in binge drinking during these times. So drinking is a huge part of college culture. A lot of the studies I looked at revolving around college-age men did talk about drinking, but it's not just drinking, it's excessive drinking. And this binge drinking leads to really, like, bad mental health. Like, it doesn't lead to anything really good. 80% of college students report some casual sex experience, and some have argued that hooking up is replacing dating. And lastly, there is a huge increase of social media once you move away for college. So Facebook for keeping in touch with family, Instagram for sharing experience, and Snapchat for documenting unflattering moments. To conclude, I just want to say, again, I'm not a psych researcher. I am a comm student, but I feel really confident in the fact that I was able to, like I said before, Frankenstein these different thoughts together to really prove that we do have a connection between social media and our well-being and how we're viewing ourselves and others. So using past research, I am able to prove that social media use contributes to gender role conflict in college-age heterosexual cisgendered men, leading to a decreased sense of self and well-being. That being said, there's so much research that needs to go on past this. So I want to talk about intersectionality. I want to talk about, well, what about Black men in college, or homosexual men in college, or people who social media wasn't as accessible for them. So what does that mean for them when they transition to college? So these are all things that need to be researched more in the future. I think we need to stop. I don't think stop, but I think we can take a pause on how social media is like, crippling girls, and we need to talk about how, men need the same kind of attention when it comes to psych research. Thank you. Yeah, so I used a psychology database to find all of the studies that I worked with. And like I mentioned before, there were so many social media studies because it's new. Like, it's within the past 15 years, really, that it's coming to the light. So there's so much research going on right now, but I noticed that there was just none on this specific topic. And yeah, I did most of my research online, but I also, when I first was thinking about my topic, I was talking to my guy friends and I was asking them, I was like, is this something that is worth looking into? Is this something you feel you're underrepresented in? And a lot of my male friends had a lot to say about body image and how they feel like they're not being heard when it comes to their mental health, body image, and social media use. Like, how is that all connected? There was never really a lot of conversation about it. So, yes, to answer your question, I did look into a lot of different psych studies.
Thank you all for coming. What I'm going to do with Anthony's, because my fault is getting started late and pushing it, is I will share with you his presentation that he has done, and not try to force him to rush through something that we shouldn't need to rush through. So we have some nice food outside for you to engage in and talk to these great students. We've done some wonderful presentations, and enjoy the rest of this symposium. So thank you again so much for coming.